Welcome to Karen's Conversations number 26. They're starting to add up. As those of you who've watched any of these conversations previously, you'll know that there's a subject I'm very, very passionate about, which is organisational change management, the people side of change. So it's with great pleasure today that I'm talking with someone who shares that passion, and that's Sam Giroux, who's the Director of People Change Management at the Australian Tax Office. And we're going to be talking about the missing link in organisational change, that's change leadership. But before we dive into that conversation, I'm going to welcome Sam and ask Sam to introduce herself.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for having me today. My name's Sam Giroux. As you know, I am the Director for People Change Management at the Australian Taxation Office. I've been there for about 10 months now, which has gone so absolutely quickly because there's been a lot of change that's been happening at the ATO. So I've been very busily using my influencing skills to make some really good things happen within the ATO. Before that, my background is within local government, but essentially I've been working within the public sector for the last 20 years, and it's been probably the last 5 to 7 years that I've been playing in the organisational change management space. I'm actually doing a PhD at the moment on accountability in the public sector, and a big focus of that is around understanding how change is managed and what sort of skills are required to be accountable, particularly within the public sector. We're seeing a lot of change happen within the public sector at the moment, and not all of it is managed particularly well. And I guess my conversation with you today, I wanted to talk about change leadership because I do see that as being the missing link for me.
Awesome. And I will just point out that Sam and I are actually working together at the moment. So this is quite an interesting chat. So when I sort of asked you, would you be interested in doing a conversation? And I said, what in all change are you passionate about? And you said that missing link that you believe that you just touched on is change leadership. And back in '95, Cotter said, change always demands leadership. So what does change leadership mean to you? How do you define it, Sam?
So leadership is a universally understood concept, and I think change leadership is not really all that different from normal leadership. It is about having a clarity of purpose, being able to understand what it is you're trying to achieve, to be able to communicate that and to bring people along on the journey. For me, the difference is with change is about being clear about where your accountability lies for bringing people along on that journey with you. In a lot of ways, we've kind of talked about leadership over the last 20 odd years or even longer as being something that is focused on a person who leads, whereas I think it is a practice now that we're seeing is a skill set that people need to have and develop, and particularly for change we need to be able to have those focal points where people stand up and say, actually, I'm the person who's accountable for this change. I believe that I need to do these things to bring people along on the change. And it's not a technical piece. It is now about looking at what we will do to maximise the benefits for our staff in making sure that they're brought along on that journey with us. So long-winded answer, Kaz. Not a lot of difference for me between leadership and change leadership, but it is around that piece of making sure that we are focusing on the people in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting. I was talking to someone the other day and I'd come across an article, I think it was in CIO, and it was entitled, What CIOs Need to Do to Lead Digital Transformations. And it said, effective communications, visible leadership. And I'm like, and the list went on. I mean, that's nothing unique to leadership, the digital transformations or leading change. So I think people are still struggling with the idea of what a really good change leader looks like. You said the one person that's accountable. I mean, are there many change leaders in an organisation, or is it ultimately the buck stops with one?
So I think for me, there's got to be someone who will put up their hand and say, yes, I am accountable here. But there are many people that will support that person. I think I find it quite difficult in my role to affect the kind of change I need without the support of people who have the authority to make people do things that perhaps as a change management practitioner I don't necessarily have. So for me, I think there are many people in the equation, but I think while I think there is always one accountable person, I think there are a set of behaviours that need to happen around change leadership and accountability for that change. So I think maybe I'm reversing a little bit on what I just said there, Kaz, because yes, absolutely there has got to be someone who's accountable, but we need everyone to be aware of what their role is in change and how they can support it. And it's every person has to be resilient to support the change. So there's a role of change leadership there for individuals, but there's also a role all along the hierarchy for those that are involved in sponsoring and supporting change.
So where would that change leader ultimately accountable likely sit, or would it vary? Is it the CXO? Is it a senior exec? Is it middle management?
I think it depends on where the change is being led from. It depends on where people are have the most ability to influence from. That's my position on change leadership, is those that are the most influential are the people that should be the change leaders and the accountable people in that space. And what the reason for that is because the more influential you are, the more you can bring people along on that change with you. Sharing that information, sharing the accountability means that we have a better way of embedding change and more ability to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real consultant response, isn't it? It depends. And it does. It depends. It depends on the nature of the change. You're absolutely right. So you talked about accountability and that being important. Tell us a bit more what accountability means to you.
Okay. So for me, accountability is about being really clear about the context with which you're operating. So in a change situation, it's about identifying clearly very early on what it is that your current state is and what your future state is and how you're going to transition between those two, and being clear about what your stakeholders' expectations are and knowing how to manage where they're sitting on that curve. Obviously, resistance is a big part of managing change. And for me, the whole part about accountability is making sure that there is someone who is going to sign off to say, yes, this is what the endpoint looks like, and this is all of the things that we're going to do to make sure that we don't have any resistance, or that we minimise the resistance.
Yeah, because there always will be some, as we know. What are some of the other traits that you think are good, that make a good change leader?
I think someone who is really clear about what it is that the change is going to do, someone who has great charisma, someone who can share their vision with others, someone who's really well connected. So it's not always resistance doesn't always come from the people that you expect it to come from. Sometimes it comes from places that aren't necessarily connected. So that whole idea of the squeaky wheel who's not necessarily involved in your change but can be someone who has an impact on your change. So, you know, what I hope change leadership does is allows people to see all of those pieces of the change wheel and say, okay, well, that's where I need to be concentrating my effort to influence. Other skills, I think, are someone who is pretty much organised, attends to the detail. And so some of the things that I've come across lately is that people who don't attend to their detail, I'm finding with some of the changes that I'm managing, they're thinking, oh, we've given all of this information out, so I don't need to reanalyze it. But it's someone who is a good change leader knows that things change as we move along, and we need to be reassessing where we're at. So someone who is up to date with the most relevant information, and I guess dedicated to making sure that it is a success. One of the things that I would love to see more of is a passion for the positive outcome being realised, rather than the flick of a switch happening at the end of the project. You talked a little bit before about things being evolving, and I think agility is something that is really necessary. I'm not talking big A, agile. I'm talking the ability to transition, shift, make transitions happen quickly. And so knowing when things aren't going to work, how you might be able to shift on that. So I guess that's for me around that one piece about their leadership skills. It varies, but again, it comes back to the earlier answer that I gave. It's not that different from being a good leader. It's just got an extra dimension of being able to influence in a different way, and quite often outside of your areas of accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to touch on one of the things you said there, Sam, about, you know, you're not in these words, but we create the change plan and it's all lined up and off we go. And we don't keep checking back in to see, are we on track? Are we on track? Because like you say, external, internal environments change on the journey, and we need to be able to respond to those. So it is that attention to that detail, and not just assume that because we set sail 2 months ago, we're still going to arrive in our destination. We're going to need to tack and adjust according to what's happening. And you mentioned, you know, agile and us being able to little a and being flexible and nimble, and which is funny because I'm reading this at the moment. I don't know if you've heard of Jason Little or seen this. I'm only halfway through. Absolutely brilliant. Highly recommend. He's pulling on all different frameworks like agile and lean and applying them to organizational change. So that's a really good one as well. We've talked about what a good change leader looks like. Do you think the role of change leadership has changed over time?
I think it has, Kaz. So once upon a time, it was about, you know, being clear about this is what the project should look like, and here is what our deliverables are going to be. And, you know, obviously we've transitioned through having waterfall as our methodology. So, you know, it's taken a long time to deliver a change, and you do get plenty of time and plenty of opportunities to bring people along on your change journey with you. Now things are expected to happen more quickly. I mean, agile as a practice is all about making sure that we're getting quick changes happening and adopted, so that, you know, we can change them if they're not where they need to be, so that we don't get to the end and find that we have a practice or a change that doesn't work. And I think the expectation is that now it's much higher expectations on any changes that we deliver, because we're focusing on what the outcome is from a financial perspective, even more so than we used to. So once upon a time it was, yes, we'll do this because we want to trial it. Now it's all about, well, we know that change management work. We know there's a science that will help support us do these changes. So we need to make sure, you know, that whole adage of 80% of changes failing is not correct anymore. You know, we've moved away from that in a really big way. We've got enough history behind us to know that if you do lead change well and manage change well, that you will get adoption and you will see return on your investment. So I think there is that extra pressure now, and it's not just let's see if this will work. It's about, okay, what can we do to make this work? So I think that's why accountability in the leadership is so much more important for change.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I did some research years ago on where did this 70%, 80% of projects fail come from. And I've recently written a blog, and I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, where I've actually claimed that the stat could actually be right, because I think it's the definition of success. Like, if you look at ProSci, it defines project success as within budget, on schedule, and delivered functionality. But I'm going, well, okay, in that case, most projects probably succeed and don't fail. But if you say rapid uptake, zero or minimum ongoing support required, customer experience satisfaction, start adding all those, and I came up with a whole raft of additional success factors. And you look at it, you go, well, really, 70% probably do fail. I mean, they'll deliver something, they'll install something, but do they really implement it? And that's where I've made the argument that it's all about change leadership and people transition, to make sure that we do get that true success for a project. Because as you know, project managers install the whatever it is and walk away, and OCM's left to make sure that it really gets embedded and reinforced, and the real benefits are realized at the end of the day.
I think that's important that you do that research, Kaz, because as a change practitioner who's embedded in projects, I only see the success stories now because we employ all of the right tools to make sure it happens. So, you know, from my perspective, everything I get involved in is pretty much a success these days. So it's good to hear that, you know, where OCM isn't used appropriately, we can measure it to say, well, actually we need OCM. That's why it's failing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of the traits, I think you touched on it, but for anyone leading change is clearly communication. And from my perspective, I find that's the biggest piece that frustrates me is misunderstanding what effective communication actually looks like. What do you think it looks like from a change leader?
So I think that's a great question. And I think that I'm going to give you the consultant answer again. It's dependent on what you are changing. So I think my view on communication is about it being tied to what your objectives are, about it being consistent, about it being delivered in the format that people best will be receptive to. And sometimes that's multiple ways. You know, an email out these days is not good enough. Holding a town hall meeting when half of your staff can't participate is not good enough. You've got to think about what are the right approaches for the people who are going to be absorbing this information. So one of the great things about working in the ATO is that we have access to some wonderful technologies. So, you know, we have opportunities to do webinars, we have opportunities to do discussions online. There are lots of different forums. We use Yammer. Pretty much my view on change management communication is that a good leader uses every tool that they can to communicate in any way to make sure that the people that need to hear the message can hear it, and it's told in their language, not in the language of the person telling it. You know, it's about making it simple, it's about making it clear, and it's about making it understood by pretty much everyone. And particularly given these days that we've got people who have multiple languages, we shouldn't have language barriers, but, you know, we should be thinking about, you know, how can we make sure that we've got the right message at the right time in the right way being delivered. I think that's particularly interesting given that today is World Emoji Day. So maybe we should just be communicating everything in emojis. You know my proclivity for that.
Yeah, we'll put a smiley face on it and just assume everyone will get it. That'll work. Yeah. Just give everyone a thumbs up, you know. Yeah, an interesting one, because I was having a discussion with some of our colleagues in the ATO today about, you know, how communication one size doesn't fit all. And I was also talking about being considerate of the sender of the message. And I was trying to make the point that people want to hear from via various channels and different frequency, but they want to hear how this change fits in with the overall direction of the organisation and the strategy and how it's going to make us competitive or take us forward and make the world a better place, etc. They want to hear that from senior people in the organisation. But when it comes down to that conversation about how is this going to impact me and my role and what I do today, I want to hear that from a leader that's close to me, because a CEO or a very senior exec saying, we know how you're going to feel about this. If I'm on the front line, I'm going to turn around and say, no, you don't. You've got no idea what this means to me. I'm going to talk to a team leader or a manager about those things. So I think there's, as well as the frequency and the content and the channels that we use, we need to be clear about who people want to hear messages from and when it's being sent.
And I think that goes back to the question that you asked me right at the start about who are the change leaders and is it one person or is it multiple? So yes, the CEO has ultimate responsibility, or whoever is in charge has ultimate responsibility, but it's about them identifying who else is going to be sharing these messages in what format, so that we're getting everyone providing a consistent message that allows all of those people who sit below that person to understand what their role is and how they need to transition. One of the things that I've found incredibly difficult is in OCM is making sure that the levels of communication filter appropriately. A lot of times we end up with Chinese whispers, and in the absence of great communications, people make up their own stories. So and they don't do it on purpose. They do it because they think they heard something that might be like that, and they anticipate that this is what this is going to look like. So they're not, in their mind, lying. They're trying to make sense out of things. So it's not a falsehood, it's just their perception of it. But when you start adding that into the mix of all the other ways we communicate through change, it can be really damaging and really undermine the great messages that we spend a lot of time preparing when we do OCM right. So that's, I guess, that grapevine and that rumour mill is really important to identify early and make sure that your influencers are in there, making sure the right messages are being shared through that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also why it's important to use so many different not channels, but ways of working out if that communication, you know, is being clear, is clarity, there is consistency, it's getting to the right people. And, you know, we can do that via formal methods, and we have tools in our toolbox to do that. But I think there's nothing more valuable than the water-cooled conversations and just listening to what people are saying as you're walking around an organization, that can really tell you whether it's, you know, we've hit the mark or not. Yeah. So I think we need to get that analysis or measurement both through formal and informal channels as well.
We talk about natural channels as well here, and I think that's one of the things that I've discovered, and I know you and I have been talking through this a little bit, but that idea of, you know, what is the easiest way to ascertain the right information about the work that you're looking on and how well it's being understood. And, you know, those natural channels are perhaps easier than, you know, sending out a formal survey that is just about your change. There is a really big place for anecdotal feedback on how things are going, and hearing that through the different networks so that you can change tactics. And I think one of the things that I talked about earlier about resilience in change is really important for our leaders, in knowing that when we're getting feedback from areas that things aren't working, that it's not personal to them, that they're not doing their job badly or that they've made a mistake. It's about, okay, well, now we've got this information, it's an opportunity to reassess what needs to happen to make sure things are moving forward. And I guess that's, for me, where that agility comes in change leadership, is that understanding of what it is I need to do and not be stuck to a fixed perspective, and be able to make sure that when we notice that things aren't going exactly where we need them to be, that we can direct the energy so that we can get ourselves to the end point in the appropriate way.
Absolutely. You've mentioned resilience a number of times, and I think it's probably come into the answer to this question. So how does a change leader manage people or transition people through change when they're undergoing change themselves?
That's a great question, Kaz. And I'm going to use 12-year-old philosophy here, as in philosophy from my 12-year-old. My son came home from school one day and talked about this concept of bucket dippers and bucket fillers. So he said to me, "Mum, I've decided I'm going to be a bucket filler." And I said, "Well, Max, I don't understand what you mean." He said, "Well, there's two kinds of people in the world. There's people who fill other people's bucket and people who take from other people's bucket." And I said, "Okay, well, that's great." And we had this discussion about, okay, well, what does that mean? Some people need to get energy from others. Some people like to create it for others. But obviously, if you spend all of your time giving your energy to other people, your bucket is going to not be full. There's not going to be enough water in your bucket to give to other people. So we had a couple of really great conversations over a period of time, because he is a bit of an interesting case, my son, and he likes to be a bucket filler. You've met him, Kaz. He's quite a little character. And he basically said to me, "I get my energy, my bucket filling from being able to give to others, but sometimes, you know, I need to do these things." So you've got to be aware, I think, as a leader, when it is your job to fill other people's buckets, about what it is you need to do to keep your own bucket full. So I love change. I'm really abnormal, because I thrive on it. When I was a child, I used to change my bedroom around every week just because I wanted to do something different. And that's not the norm. We know that most people either resist change or are scared of change or, you know, are ambivalent to change. That's the majority of the world. So as a change leader who sits on that side of the spectrum, it's really important for people to identify what they need to do to keep their own bucket filled. For me, I am that person that I absolutely love giving my resilience to others, because that does create that resilience within me. But I know that that's not normal, and I don't expect other people to emulate me. So I just try to encourage people wherever possible to make sure that they're building their own internal well to keep their buckets, their resilience full.
Absolutely, and that's a great analogy. And yeah, I think we just need to realise when we're, you know, when we're filling someone else's or filling our own, and most of us need to do a bit of both at different times. Otherwise we just burn out, because organisational change is a tough gig a lot of the time. It's because people are tricky things.
They are. They sure are. And I think, you know, some people feel that, you know, as someone who leads change, because I've got to be really on message all the time, because I've got to be someone that is sending the right message, that it's not okay for me to feel poorer or badly when change is happening to me and I'm trying to explore that. I think it's really important that all of the leaders who are experiencing change need to understand, okay, well, I need a bit of time to just understand how this impacts me. And it's okay to take that. It's just not okay to be telling people that you don't agree with the change.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things I was going to ask you, if someone's, you know, they're hearing us talk and they've heard some of the other conversations or read some of the things that have been written, you know, change management, organisational change management sounds like something that I'd like to get into. What would you say if someone said, you know, I've not been involved in it, how do I start? You know, what would I need to do?
That's a great question, Kaz, and I've done a bit of recruitment recently for the ATO, and my perspective on it is it's about experience, and it's about attitude, and it's about taking the opportunities that come your way. So I think most people do get the opportunity to be involved in changes throughout their careers. I know my very first job that I worked in ANZ before I joined the public sector, and there was a massive change that happened, a big restructure, and I watched the consultants doing that job of putting all of the pieces together to figure out what the end product would look like for this restructure, and I went, I want to do that. That's going to be the job that I do when I grow up, I suppose. And I just basically took every opportunity that I could to review what the reading said out there that I could do, and to basically give myself as much experience as I could in change management. It doesn't have to be labelled change management. It's about what you, everything you do where there is a change is an opportunity, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. It's, you know, get involved, jump on the wagon if you can, read as much as you can, you know, feel that quench for information, and just take as much advantage as you can. Absolutely. Yeah. And that sort of leads to probably my last question. So do you think there are natural change leaders, or is it something that can be learnt, or is it a bit of both?
I think it's a bit of both, Kaz. I think that some people are born with an innate skill to lead change. I think some people really understand what people need to get them through, and so they have an ability to focus on that. But I do believe it's a bit like emotional intelligence that can be learned, and I'd probably correlate the two in a lot of ways. I think to be a good people change manager, you must have high levels of emotional intelligence, not only to regulate how you feel about where things are going, but also to be able to read where other people are at and figure out what you need to do to support them through that change. And there's plenty of research that tells us that emotional intelligence can be learned, and certainly lots of books out there you can read, lots of courses you can go on, lots of activities that can be done.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a bit of a hybrid. I think there's people who have a natural tendency towards change leadership because they have some of those inherent abilities to be listeners and good communicators and provide clarity and be good at storytelling and all that sort of thing. And I'm sure, there's lots of then other things like emotional intelligence that, can be learned. But I think we've also seen people that we just go, you would never, ever, ever make them a leader of change. It's just not part of their DNA. But,
it's interesting though. I've worked with people in the past who I would have said, would have sworn black and blue that they would be the worst leader of a change. But when they're really passionate about something, I think people can pull something out of the box and say, okay, well, this is what needs to happen. But I think where people have good coaching and have, I guess, good vision for what should happen in the end, anything's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a bit like when we talk about, identifying your biggest resistors to change, the loudest people resisting your change. And if you can turn them round, they can be your biggest change champions. And it's a bit along those lines, isn't it? When people go, they'll never be on board. So we spend a lot of energy getting them, if we can, get them on board. And then the impact, the ripple impact that can have in an organisation is pretty amazing. I know you've seen it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Sam, it's been absolutely awesome. We've been trying to schedule this for a little while with our calendars, but it's great that we've finally managed to do it. So I really appreciate you taking your time out from sunny Brisbane. Look at you in your sorry?
It's 28 here today.
Look at me in my sweatshirt. It's freezing in Melbourne. But anyway, I really, really appreciate you taking the time, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thanks very much, Sam.
Pleasure, Kaz.
So Karen's Conversations number 27 will be coming up shortly, and I'll be talking to Lewis Spence from Randstad Recruiting about the future and trends in the IT marketplace. So stand by for that one.